Welcome to Karen Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to never miss a crazy story. Let's dive in.
I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped outside. The air smelled of chlorine and sunscreen, thick and artificial, a scent that shouldn't be hanging in my backyard. And then I saw her. No, them. A woman, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses. The unmistakable aura of entitlement was lounging on one of my deck chairs like she owned the place. Beside her, a child splashed in my pool, completely oblivious to the absurdity of the situation. For a second, I just stood there, blinking, my brain struggling to catch up. This was my house, my backyard, my pool, and there were strangers using it like it was some community center. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" The woman barely glanced up from her phone, her fingers swiping lazily across the screen. "Oh," she said, like I was the one intruding. "Is this your property?" A surge of disbelief shot through me. "Yes," I snapped, my patience already thinning. "That's my chair. That's my pool. You're trespassing." She gave an exaggerated sigh, as if I'd just informed her that, tragically, the nail salon was out of her favorite shade of beige. "Well, you see," she said in a condescending tone that made my teeth grind, "the lake is way too cold, and my son wanted to swim. Your pool was right here. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity. My pool was right here, as if that somehow justified this blatant invasion. "You need to leave," I said, my voice tightening. Now, the kid, still splashing around, either didn't hear me or was ignoring me completely. Karen, however, finally lowered her sunglasses, fixing me with a look of patronizing exasperation. "Look, there's no reason to be rude. It's just a pool. It's my pool." That was when she stood up, flipping her phone onto the chair and placing her hands on her hips. "Wow," she said, shaking her head like I was some charity case that had just deeply disappointed her. "I can't believe you're being this selfish." I let out a sharp laugh. "Selfish? You broke into my yard, let your kid swim in my pool without asking, and now I'm selfish?" she scoffed. "Oh, come on. It's not like you were even using it." I felt my pulse hammering behind my temples. My patience was fraying fast. "That doesn't matter. You don't just walk into someone's yard and use their stuff because you feel like it. You wouldn't do that with a car or someone's kitchen." Karen waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. It's just water. Just water." At this point, I was gripping the back of a chair, just to keep myself from screaming. I turned toward the kid who was still happily paddling around. "Hey buddy, time to get out." I barely got the words out before she went full nuclear. "How dare you talk to my child like that?" she shrieked, stepping toward me like she was ready to slap the pool water off my property through sheer force of will. "He has feelings, you know. He's just a child." I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. "I don't care how old he is. He's in my pool that he wasn't invited to. You both need to leave before I call the cops." Her expression twisted, a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Good. Go ahead. I'll just tell them you threatened my child." I froze. That was when I realized exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. The type who would flip reality on its head if it suited her. "You'll tell them what?" Karen's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, you know, a big, scary man, intimidating a helpless single mother and her child. They love cases like that." My blood ran cold. I took a step back, suddenly hyper-aware of how easily this could turn into a nightmare. Then, as if she hadn't just threatened to outright fabricate a crime, she turned to her son, her voice switching from venomous to syrupy sweet. "Come on, honey. This mean man doesn't understand kindness." As the kid climbed out of the pool, dripping chlorinated water all over my deck, Karen gave me one last sneer. "You clearly weren't raised to share. I'll make sure everyone in the neighborhood knows just how nasty you are." I crossed my arms. "Oh, please do. I'd love to hear how you explain breaking into someone's backyard to the whole HOA." She scowled, yanked her phone off the chair, then grabbed her bag in a huff. But, just as she started to storm off, she gave one last petty act of defiance, kicking over my deck chair as she left. Then, with a few final shouted expletives, she was gone, dragging her still dripping child behind her. I stood there for a long moment, the rage simmering just beneath my skin. Then I turned to the overturned chair, my sunscreen still laying in the grass where she had tossed it, and let out a breath. The absurdity of it all hit me at once. A stranger had literally broken into my yard, used my pool, and then tried to paint me as the villain for daring to tell them to leave. Shaking my head, I pulled out my phone and made a mental note. Security cameras. ASAP. I woke up the next morning still fuming, my brain replaying every ridiculous second of yesterday's encounter. But if I thought Karen was done, I clearly underestimated the sheer persistence of entitled lunatics. It started with a knock, no, pounding, on my front door. I set my coffee down, heart already sinking, and pulled open the door to find Karen standing there with an expression so smug it could power an entire HOA board meeting. Beside her was a man in a cheap button-down, clipboard in hand, his expression a mix of irritation and mild embarrassment. A name tag pinned to his shirt read Michael Bennett, Community Compliance Officer. Karen barely gave me time to register what was happening before she launched into her performance. There he is, the man who traumatized my poor child. She said it loud enough that, if any neighbors were listening, they'd immediately assume I had committed some heinous crime. I blinked. Are you serious? Michael cleared his throat. Sir, we've received a complaint about unauthorized modifications to your property, as well as reports of aggressive behavior toward fellow residents. I stared at him, then at Karen, then back at him. What? Karen huffed dramatically, folding her arms. I told you, Michael. He has installed dangerous, unsanctioned surveillance equipment, which is making the neighborhood uncomfortable. And, she paused for effect, eyes gleaming with self-satisfaction, he threatened my child. I felt something inside me snap. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Michael exhaled, clearly wishing he were anywhere but here. Sir, the HOA has strict rules about external modifications, including security cameras. You were required to submit a request before installation. My jaw clenched so hard, I was surprised my teeth didn't crack. So let me get this straight. She breaks into my yard, lets her kids swim in my pool without permission, and when I install cameras to prevent this from happening again, I'm the problem. Michael shifted uncomfortably. We're not here to discuss past incidents, just compliance with HOA regulations. Karen grinned like she'd already won. Exactly. We can't have unsafe elements in our community. I took a slow breath, barely managing to keep my voice level. Unsafe? Unsafe? I'm sorry. Which one of us trespassed on private property yesterday? She waved a hand dismissively. I already explained my son was cold, and you were incredibly rude about it. Michael rubbed his temples. Sir, let's just go over the violations. He flipped a page on his clipboard. First, you have installed security cameras without HOA approval. Second, your pool fence is not up to the new compliance height requirement. I blinked again, trying to make sense of this level of insanity. New requirement? Michael coughed. As of this morning, the HOA has amended the regulations. Fences must now be a minimum of 6 feet high. I stared at Karen, who was smiling way too much for someone pretending to be a concerned neighbor. You changed the rules overnight? I asked, incredulous. Karen gasped dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest like a poorly cast soap opera actress. I don't control the rules, but some of us care about keeping our neighborhood up to standard. Michael, to his credit, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world right now. Look, if you can just submit a request for the cameras and raise the fence, I think we can resolve this without any fines. That's when Karen struck again. Oh, Michael, don't forget the lawsuit. I physically recoiled. The what? She pursed her lips in mock concern. Well, you see, my precious child has been emotionally scarred by your aggression. He hasn't slept a wink since your verbal assault. I had to take him to a therapist. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to process the sheer audacity of this woman. Let me guess. The therapist is your sister? Karen gasped. How dare you? Michael cleared his throat again. There is an official complaint filed for emotional distress. The board is reviewing it. I took a slow step forward, forcing Karen to take an instinctive step back. So let me make sure I understand. You trespassed. I told you to leave. And now I'm being fined, threatened with a lawsuit, and accused of traumatizing your kid? Karen sniffed. I wouldn't call it trespassing. We were just borrowing your space. You weren't even using it. I clenched my fists so hard. I thought my nails might pierce my palms. That's it. I'm done. I'll see you in court. Her smug expression flickered ever so slightly. Oh, please. Do you really want to go up against the HOA's legal team? Michael, realizing this was escalating beyond his pay grade, mumbled something about letting the board handle it and hurriedly excused himself. Karen, though, took a sweet time stepping off my porch, pausing just long enough to toss out one last parting shot. You really should learn to get along with your neighbors, she cooed. Otherwise, things might get very difficult for you. I slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. That night, I filed a trespassing report with the police. And the next morning, I got a letter from the HOA, a formal notice of violation, and an emergency HOA meeting scheduled to discuss my behavior. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or start breaking things. Karen wanted a war. She just got one. The emergency HOA meeting was set for 7 p.m. sharp, and I was ready for war. I walked into the community center, and every head in the room turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and a few people shot me nervous glances before pretending they hadn't been staring. Karen, of course, was seated front and center, flanked by 2 other self-proclaimed neighborhood royalty members, both nodding along as she whispered conspiratorially. At the long table up front sat the HOA board, including Richard Thornton, the HOA president, who I had already learned was as corrupt as a slot machine rigged to steal your quarters. His expression was neutral, but something about the way he tapped his fingers against the table told me he was enjoying this. Karen smirked as I took my seat near the back. Oh, good. He actually showed up, she said, loudly enough for the entire room to hear. Her little squad giggled. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. They wanted me to explode. They wanted me to lose my temper in front of the HOA, so they could paint me as unstable, the dangerous, aggressive neighbor who threatens innocent, single mothers and their children. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Richard cleared his throat and stood. All right, let's get started. We have an important matter to discuss this evening regarding compliance violations, aggressive behavior, and the general safety of our community. I scoffed, earning a sharp glare from him. Safety of the community. These people broke into my yard, swam in my pool, and now I was the threat? Karen raised her hand like she was in a middle school classroom. Yes, I'd like to speak first, she said with dramatic urgency. Because frankly, I don't feel safe in my own neighborhood anymore. A few people murmured in concern. Some older woman in the second row nodded solemnly. Oh, here we go. Karen turned in her chair, leveling her gaze at me, her voice quivering as she spoke. I have lived in this community for years, and I have never had an issue with a neighbor until him. She pointed directly at me, as if I were some rabid dog that had broken through the gate. He verbally attacked me in front of my child. He made us feel unwelcome, as if we, don't belong here, I snorted. You don't belong in my yard, that's for sure. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen clutched her pearls like she'd just been struck across the face. See? Aggressive. Threatening. Richard held up a hand, pretending to be impartial. Let's keep things civil. Then he turned to me, eyes cold. Would you care to respond to these allegations? I stood, making sure to keep my voice level, controlled. Sure. Let's start with the fact that Karen trespassed on my property and used my pool without permission. A few people nodded. Good. They weren't all drinking the Kool-Aid. Karen let out a short, incredulous laugh. Oh, please. Trespassing. I stepped through an unlocked gate so my child, who was suffering from heat exhaustion, by the way, could cool off. I barked out a laugh. You mean the same suffering child who was doing cannonballs into my pool? Karen's face turned red. You're missing the point. You humiliated us. I threw my hands up. You humiliated yourself. You helped yourself to someone else's property and got mad when you were told no. Richard cleared his throat. Regardless, we need to focus on the real concern, which is the hostile environment you've created. My patience snapped. Hostile? You mean securing my home against intruders? Because that's what I did, and I don't regret it. If anything, I should be pressing charges. That got the room's attention. Even Karen faltered for a moment before recovering. Oh, come on. Pressing charges for what? Being neighborly? Being neighborly? I repeated, incredulous. You threatened me with a lawsuit because I wouldn't let your kid swim in my pool. She opened her mouth, but before she could spew another lie, I pulled a folder from my bag and slapped it onto the table up front. I have receipts. The room collectively leaned in. Even Richard looked uneasy. I flipped open the folder and held up a printed screenshot. This is Karen, posting in the community Facebook group, telling everyone to boycott my house because I'm ruining the community spirit. I tossed it onto the table. And this why I pulled out another screenshot is a private message she sent to another neighbor saying she planned to make my life hell until I move. Karen's mouth snapped shut. Murmurs erupted through the room. Some people were whispering to each other, exchanging knowing glances. I wasn't done. And let's talk about this, I said, pulling out the trespassing complaint I'd filed with the police. Because this wheeze, an actual crime, one that, legally, I could press charges for. Karen's face went from red to pale in an instant. Richard's expression soured. This wasn't going according to their plan. I'm not the villain here, I continued, voice firm. I just want to live in peace, without people like her treating my property like some community park. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down, made up some nonsense about her kid being traumatized, tried to have my cameras removed, and lalled about the entire situation. The room fell into a thick, uncomfortable silence. Finally, one of the board members, Jenkins, a guy I'd never spoken to before, leaned forward and cleared his throat. If there's a police report involved, I think we should reconsider Karen's complaint. Karen shot up from her seat. This is insane. You're taking his side. He's the one making trouble. Richard's jaw tensed. We'll discuss this in a closed session. Translation, they knew they had lost this one, and they needed to retreat before they looked worse. Karen huffed, turning on her heel and storming toward the exit. But before she left, she threw one last glare over her shoulder. You'll regret this, I smirked. You already do. And with that, the meeting was over. Karen wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. But now, neither was I. I should have known Karen wouldn't accept defeat. Not after I embarrassed her in front of the entire HOA. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab my newspaper. Yes, I still get a physical one. Don't judge me. And nearly tripped over a pile of garbage that had been strategically dumped at the end of my driveway. Rotten food scraps, crumpled fast food wrappers, and just to really sell the pettiness, dozens of empty juice boxes, all crushed under someone's heel like a final insult. Karen. I didn't even need to see her standing across the street, in her ridiculous pink athleisure set, holding her little yapping dog like a villain, stroking a cat. The smug, daring smirk on her face confirmed everything. Oh, good morning, she cooed, taking a sip from a Starbucks cup that was definitely too full to be her first of the day. Shame about the mess. Looks like someone's been having a heart problem. I took a deep breath through my nose, forcing my hands to stay unclenched. So that's your play now? Trash? Really? Karen gasped, placing a manicured hand on her chest. Oh, accusing me without evidence. How bold. Then she tilted her head with mock sympathy. Maybe if you weren't so hostile to the neighborhood, people wouldn't feel the need to express their concerns in other ways. I exhaled sharply, keeping my tone even. You have about 5 seconds to pick this up before I call the police for illegal dumping. She let out a dramatic hutsk sound. Oh please, the police? Over some garbage? Do you really want to waste their time? You might as well call them about your ridiculous security cameras while you're at it. And just like that, my frustration turned cold. She wanted me to react, to scream, to get aggressive, because then she could spin it into my being the unhinged neighbor. I smiled. Oh, I won't call the police. Karen blinked. You won't? Nope. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the trash, then another of her standing there, looking suddenly less amused. I'll just send these to the HOA. Her mouth opened and closed like a malfunctioning fish. The HOA? I shrugged. Yeah, you love following the rules, right? Surely they wouldn't appreciate someone intentionally lowering property values with unsanitary waste disposal. Her expression twisted into something ugly. You wouldn't. Oh, I absolutely would. Before she could sputter out another defense, I turned on my heel and walked back inside, grinning as I heard her mutter something deeply unladylike under her breath. This wasn't over. By the time I checked my email that afternoon, a formal complaint had already landed in my inbox. Not against her for dumping garbage, oh no. That would be logical. Instead, Karen had reported me to the HOA for creating a hostile and unsafe environment. I had to hand it to her. The woman was nothing if not persistent. The complaint was laughably vague, citing disruptive behavior, threatening language, and, my personal favorite, an overbearing surveillance presence that makes residents feel uncomfortable in their own homes. I read it 3 times, blinking at the sheer audacity. She was complaining about my security cameras, the same ones I installed because she kept trespassing. I rubbed my temples, sighing. All right, Karen, you want to play dirty? Let's go. The next HOA hearing wasn't for another week, which meant I had time to do my own research. Because Karen, she wasn't just a bored suburban menace. Oh no, she was a professional at this. A few hours of digging led me to a beautiful revelation. Karen had a history of filing bogus HOA complaints. Old neighborhood forums were littered with grievances about her. She had once tried to fine a neighbor because their Christmas lights were too bright. She had reported another for their choice of front door color. And this one made me laugh out loud. She had attempted to have someone's lemon tree removed because she didn't like the smell of citrus. I compiled everything into a neat little folder. Screenshots, archived posts, and, just for dramatic effect, a petition that a previous neighborhood had started to have her removed from the HOA board. Oh, this was going to be fun. The day of the HOA hearing, I walked into the room with my folder under my arm, fully prepared for Karen's latest Oscar-worthy performance. Sure enough, she was already at the front of the room, shaking her head sadly as she spoke. I just feel so unsafe in my own neighborhood. This man has made it impossible to enjoy our peaceful community. Richard nodded along. We take these concerns very seriously. I held up my hand. Great, because I have some concerns too. Karen faltered, her mouth snapping shut. I strolled up to the front and placed my folder on the table. I did a little digging. Turns out Karen has quite the history of harassing her neighbors. Richard stiffened. That's irrelevant to this complaint. I raised an eyebrow. Is it? Because I think it's very relevant that Karen has filed over a dozen bogus complaints in other neighborhoods. I flipped open the folder, pulling out the petition with her name bolded at the top. In fact, her last HOA wanted her banned from participating altogether. The room filled with whispers. Karen's face strained of color. That's a misrepresentation. I flipped another page. Here's an archived complaint where you tried to have someone evicted for having a front door that didn't match your neighborhood aesthetic. Richard looked increasingly uncomfortable. I turned to the rest of the room. I don't think Karen is actually concerned about the community's safety. I think she just likes control. More murmurs. A few board members exchanged glances. Richard, sensing things were slipping out of his grasp, cleared his throat. Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll need time to review this. Translation? We're panicking and don't know how to cover for her. Karen, realizing she was losing, stood so fast. Her chair nearly toppled over. This isn't fair. He's trying to make me look bad. I smiled. Karen, you do that all on your own. The meeting adjourned shortly after. No ruling was made on me so-called violations. But the best part. By the next morning, Karen's own neighbors were calling for her removal from the HOA. And I just enjoyed my coffee, watching her panic from my perfectly legal security cameras. The storm was coming. Not a literal storm, though that would have been preferable, but the Karen variety, the kind that comes with passive-aggressive threats, fake outrage, and the absolute refusal to accept reality. I saw it in her posture the next morning when I stepped outside to grab my newspaper. She was already there, standing on her porch across the street, arms folded so tightly. I half expected her to snap in half. Her little yappy dog, some overpriced designer breed, barked furiously at me like it was personally offended by my existence. "Enjoying your victory," she called out, voice dripping with venom. I smiled as I unfolded my paper. Immensely. Her face twitched. "Oh, don't get too comfortable. This isn't over." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, your own neighbors are petitioning to have you removed from the HOA. Maybe it's time to accept that you've lost." Her mouth tightened. "They're hush sheep. manipulated by your lies." She took a deep breath and tilted her chin up, her voice adopting that sickly sweet condescension. "But, unlike you, I don't resort to underhanded tactics. I believe in justice." I sighed. "Karen, if you have an actual point, get to it. I have better things to do than listen to you monologue." "Oh, you'll see soon enough," she said, turning on her heel and marching back inside. I shook my head. "Whatever it is, I'll be ready." By lunchtime, I had my answer. A city code enforcement officer showed up at my door. "Sir, we've received multiple complaints about code violations on your property." The man, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, flipped open a notepad. Reports include improper fence height, unauthorized surveillance, and unmaintained vegetation obstructing public view. I actually laughed. "Let me guess, these complaints came from Morny person?" The officer hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to say." I smirked. "Sure. Well, since I just installed that fence after the HOA's updated regulations, and me security cameras have already been reviewed by the board, and..." I stepped to the side, gesturing at my meticulously trimmed hedges. "I doubt overgrown vegetation is really an issue here. I think we both know this is nonsense." The officer sighed, clearly exhausted. "Look, I'll do a quick walk around, but if everything checks out, I'll mark the complaints as unfounded and close the case." I gave him the go-ahead, watching as he went through the motions of measuring my fence, checking my cameras, and literally squinting at my bushes as if searching for some grand offense. 10 minutes later, he returned to my front step and shook his head. "Yeah, no violations here." "Shocking." I deadpanned. The officer exhaled through his nose. "Off the record? This happens more often than you'd think. People weaponizing city code enforcement over petty HOA disputes." "Oh, trust me, I believe it." He made a few notes on his clipboard. "I'll go ahead and file this as closed. If more complaints come in, they'll be flagged as harassment." I grinned. "You might want to prepare for that." The officer gave me a weary nod and left. I watched as he drove off, only to spot Karen peeking from behind her curtains, her phone clutched in a death grip. I waved. She yanked the curtains shut. By the next day, Karen had escalated from city code complaints to full-blown neighborhood warfare. I woke up to find my mailbox smashed in. Now, I could have assumed it was just some random act of vandalism, but given the fact that Karen had tried to get my security cameras banned, she obviously hadn't considered the very obvious flaw in her plan. Because the cameras caught everything, there she was, at 2:17 a.m., dressed in all black like she was on some low-budget espionage mission, skulking across the street with a baseball bat in hand. She paused, glancing around before rearing back and smashing my mailbox to pieces. Then, as if that weren't insane enough, she flipped off my camera, like some kind of victory pose. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. "Oh, Karen, you absolute moron." After I composed myself, I did what any reasonable person would do. I marched straight to the police station with my footage. By noon, Karen was standing in her front yard, screaming at 2 officers. "This is ridiculous. He's setting me up. It's fabricated." One of the officers, who looked exactly as done with her as I felt, held up his hand. "Ma'am, the footage clearly shows you vandalizing his property. You're lucky he's only pressing for reimbursement and not full charges." Karen turned toward me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You're ruining this community." I smiled. "No, Karen. You did that all by yourself." She clenched her fists, visibly shaking with rage, before turning to the officers. "Fine. Whatever. I'll pay for the stupid mailbox." The officers handed her a citation, giving her a final warning before leaving. Karen, humiliated beyond belief, stomped back toward her house, only to pause at the door. She turned, looking me dead in the eye. "This isn't over." I chuckled. "I really hope it is." She stormed inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. By the end of the week, Karen was a neighborhood pariah. Word had spread fast about her antics, especially once the HOA officially banned her from filing further complaints. Neighbors started avoiding her. People, openly, gossiped about her at the mailbox. Her name became a warning for new residents. And me? I installed a brand new mailbox, reinforced, indestructible, and with a camera built right into it, just in case. Because, let's be honest, Karen might be down, but she was never out.